Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today we're going to be talking about the Virginia elections 2017. Joining me is political analyst Benjamin Tribbett. Thank you so much for being here, Ben.
Thank you, Catherine.
So you have a unique perspective on Virginia because you have been following every election cycle for the last 20 years, right down to the precinct level, and I am continually in awe of your ability to be able to remember and track trends right down to the precinct level during each of these very different election cycles. So this one has been quite remarkable, and it is still not over. A lot of us were following your Twitter feed the night of the election. You called the governor for Ralph Northam at 7:35 p.m. You tweet at not Larry Sabato on Twitter. So tell us a little bit about how you saw this unfolding on election night.
Sure. Well, I was obviously tracking it throughout the day, and we knew going into Election Day that the Democrats had built up a really good absentee advantage. But one of the things you never know about absentee voters is whether or not they are replacing the voters on Election Day or are they additional voters. Because if you take someone like me or you voting absentee, we were going to show up anyway on Election Day. So it really doesn't mean anything if absentee numbers are up if people like us are voting absentee. But when people that have more spotty voting histories are voting absentee, it tells you it's an indicator of a rising tide that's coming. So on Election Day, what we were looking for would turnout be around where it was in 2013, given that absentee voting had gone up, which would be an advantage to Ralph Northam. And immediately on the day, we saw, as soon as the Election Day opened, that it was going to be a larger turnout than it was in 2013. And that meant that Ralph Northam stood a very good chance of being elected governor. There's usually not, in Roslyn, I had a friend post at 6 a.m. on election morning, there were 25 people in line. People don't go vote at 6 a.m. in Roslyn usually because they can get up later and still make it in. And so when you see that kind of turnout in Arlington, people waiting outside to vote, that's usually not a Republican wave that's coming. That usually means it's a Democratic wave. And we heard from the rural precincts around the state that they were very, very quiet in the morning. They picked up as the day went on. But it was pretty clear to me by 9 a.m. that morning that Ralph Northam was going to win. And the question was this going to be a historic level win? I actually went on John Frederick's radio show at 9 a.m. that day and predicted around a 10-point win for him, at least 10 House delegate pickups, and they laughed. And so that was ridiculous. And I was like, I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. This isn't actually a pre-election day prediction. I'm telling you what we're seeing on the ground from where the turnout is. And they thought that was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. So around 6 o'clock at night, I got a call from one of the Gillespie people who had been telling me all day that I was completely wrong about this, who said, yeah, I got some new numbers from Fairfax County, and I'm getting a little shaky on where we stand. So it took them a little while longer to figure it out, but waves for Republicans tend not to come out of Northern Virginia.
Yeah, that's true. But there were a lot of, because I was at the polls, 3 different polls in Fairfax City, what struck me, despite the fact that it was cold and rainy, the volume of people coming and who was coming. Especially late at night, there were families with young children. There were moms with babies in strollers and toddlers in rain boots, and I'm thinking, I work every election cycle too, and I don't see you people. Like, I have never seen so many families with young children in the rain, in the dark, and in the cold coming out to vote.
And I think that there's a lot of national factors that are driving it, but the thing that we should never forget is Ralph Northam was a good candidate who was appealing to voters. And you can't get more likable than a pediatric neurologist. So, I think that there are certainly national trends that are driving this, but I think when the national trends get discussed, sometimes the candidate gets forgotten, and I don't want to forget that Ralph was a good candidate who did a good job in this campaign.
And Mark Rozelle kind of pointed that out too, is that, when he was primaried by Tom Perriello, he really upped his game. He really did up his game, and I look back on that and think that was, and I thought from the beginning that was not a bad thing at all, because voters have in their mind what they think a candidate ought to look like and sound like. But once he won that primary, and he was embraced by Tom Perriello immediately, he could go forward as Ralph Northam again. I mean, that's what Mark Rozelle was saying. It's like he could be the person he always was, the candidate he wanted to be. And he felt like Gillespie never got that opportunity because, Corey Stewart didn't endorse him, his base, and he was almost beaten. I mean, he almost didn't get the nomination. So that Gillespie really was not true to himself as the candidate he was.
Absolutely. And I think that Tom Perriello deserves a lot of credit, too, for his role in this campaign, both in his immediate support of Ralph reuniting the party, but also in his work for the House of Delegate candidates.
Oh, he was fantastic. He was fantastic.
Right.
I mean, he went around, and and again, it reminds me so much of what, when Terry McAuliffe didn't get the nomination in 2009, he immediately set about going to every corner, every meeting every voter in Virginia, and supporting them. And so Tom did that immediately, too. And I think it made a huge difference to the House of Delegate candidates. I felt like it, especially first-time candidates, it empowered them to think that Tom Perriello, this former congressman, believed in them, was willing to invest in them, and was there for them.
Absolutely. And, Tom was really bringing new tools to the table also for those candidates, helping them reach voters in different ways. And in this kind of election where you have a large turnout, reaching people through different means is important, because one of the reasons that certain groups of voters have lower turnouts than others is they're not as easily reachable.
Right.
And so when you're using new technologies to reach them, it does help you reach a broader swath of the electorate. And I thought he played an important role in that.
I think he did too. Brad Komar was talking about their texting campaign, and a question was asked at after Virginia Votes, which VPAP put on, saying were those bots or were those real people? And Brad was like, you can't use bots. They were real people. But what it did was it actually engaged people in a different way. And I got messages too via text message, like, can you volunteer? Are you going to show up? And I would text back and I'm like, I've already voted, or I'm working a poll. But there was that connection via text. I thought it was very effective.
Yeah, it was very effective.
So let's talk about some of the more unlikely candidates. Let's talk about Lee Carter, for instance, which I feel like that was a surprise. Kelly Fowler against Ron Villanueva, 25 years old. I thought that was kind of a surprise. Were some of the ones that surprised me actually not surprises to you?
Well, I think that in a wave, what tends to settle in is party performance rather than the candidates' campaigns. So what you see is that there were 18 districts, when you include absentee voting, that supported Hillary Clinton last year that had Republican delegates. 16 of them, by the end of this recount, probably will have flipped. There were no districts that voted for Donald Trump, when you include absentee ballots that voted for a Democratic delegate this year. So it really has a lot to do with where the base party performance was. I think the most impressive thing about, say, a Lee Carter is that he actually ran closer to the top of the ticket than the targeted races did, even though he didn't do any communications. And I thought that was, you could read that two ways. One, you could read that Lee Carter was so incredibly appealing as a candidate that he outperformed all the Democrats who did all this work and spent all this money. Questionable. The more likely outcome is that the Democratic spending was actually counterproductive in the House races and actually brought their candidates down a couple points, because the candidates who were targeted the most actually performed the worst versus the top of the ticket.
And that is very interesting too. And I will say too about polling, I've pretty much gotten to the point where people are like, well, what do you think about the polls? I'm like, I don't listen to the polls because they've been so incredibly inaccurate. And I think this one was a tough one to call too, a lot of the polls. So those 17 districts you were talking about, from the beginning they said they were competitive because they had gone for Hillary. But as you and I know, off-year elections bring out different people. First of all, a lot of people stay home the year after a presidential election. And the people who do vote in those elections generally are different people. One of the things that came out, Chris Levitt was talking about the fact that Republican voters don't vote absentee. They like to show up to the polls in person. I have personally seen that in Fairfax City. A lot of them are older, and they, want to go in and cast their ballot. And so almost 2-to-1, the Democrats outperformed in the absentee voting. But what was different about this election? Who came out?
Well, Ed Gillespie got more votes than Ken Cuccinelli did 4 years earlier. So turnout was up across the board. Turnout was actually high in some of the Republican precincts also. But in the Democratic precincts, it was off the charts. We've never seen anything like this. The return rate statewide was over 70% of people that voted for Hillary Clinton came back and voted for Ralph Northam. Usually that number is closer to 50, 55% for the gubernatorial candidate. That's off the charts, and I think that was partly driven by the national environment, and that the national environment creates an interest in the race, and then the candidates have to take advantage of that. And so, you look at where Ralph did well, and the more presidential Democratic votes there were, the better he did. And it had very little bearing on where the race stood in 2013 or 2009 or state election years. This looked much more like a federal election. And the turnout patterns were actually very similar to what we used to see in midterm federal elections when there was a U.S. Senate race on the ballot.
Which there will be next year.
Right, where you see surges in places where there's a lot of what we would call federal voters. Those federal voters suddenly got interested in the state election and came out and cast their ballots. And one of the things about lower information voters like that don't participate every year, they also tend to be straight ticket voters because they don't have as much, where you have a split ticket voter, it might be your neighbor who's 70 years old who says, oh, but this local delegate, I've known them since they were 30 years old and I knew their mother, and so I'm going to split my ticket. With lower propensity voters like federal voters, when they do show up, they don't tend to have that information. They don't tend to have that attachment to the community,
right.
And so they vote straight ticket. And that's a good example when you use Lee Carter as an example, because a lot of people felt that not only was Jackson Miller strong to begin with from previous elections, his wife had just passed away.
Right.
He was and people were like, oh, he can't possibly lose this. People will be very sympathetic. I think they were very sympathetic. I think he did capture all that vote. I think part of what happened to him was that there was this huge influx of people in Manassas that didn't even know who Jackson Miller was. And they were new voters showing up, and they voted straight Democratic ticket. And Lee ended up winning easily. So what this leads to, Catherine, is waves bring people in, and then midterms, they got to stand on their own 2 feet. And so now all these delegates, the clock started ticking on them. 730 days from the time they were elected. They're now down to just over 700 days till they're back on the ballot in 2019, and they got to stand on their own 2 feet. And the ones that think that this was about them probably are going to lose. The ones that figured out that they brought in on a wave and they've got 2 years to ingratiate themselves into the community, they'll be the ones who are reelected. And so we have to see who will do that.
And I keep talking about constituent services and the importance of constituent services and why a lot of incumbents are reelected at 97%. Frank Wolf stayed in office for 30 years, not because he represented the makeup of his district, but because even Democrats were like, he helped them out. His office was great, his staff was great. And so we're losing 15, former delegates and their office staff. And so I'm with you. It's kind of like these delegates are on a learning curve just to learn what the office is. They also have to staff up with all brand new people who may or may not know anything about running a delegate office, and they've got to deliver to the expectations of their constituent services. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next cycle in 2019. But when we come back from this break, what I want to talk about too is what you see for 2018, and also talk about the ones that are still up in the air, because we have 3 races that are still undecided, and after the break, Ben's going to tell us what he thinks about that.
You made your house a reality. Homeschooling yourself on loans, color-coding listings, and flushing every toilet in a 20-mile radius. If you can ace house hunting, you can do it for retirement. Get on track with tips at aceyourretirement.org.
Here's to the things that can keep us safe. Those we use all the time with hardly a thought. Those that are silently standing by to save our lives. And now, those that we carry with us everywhere we go. Many mobile devices will now bring you wireless emergency alerts, real-time information directly from local sources you know and trust. With the unique sound and vibration, you'll be in the know.
Listen, I realize that I'm not perfect, but it all really started to change because you judge me for having a problem. No one is going to know that I need help. I need help. I know that no one is going to judge me for having a problem. I realize that I'm not perfect, but it all really started to change because you listen.
Family.
Whether it's a short trip or a long haul.
Estimated time, 47 hours.
They will beg.
You're hungry? I'm happy to provide.
They will plead.
Deep fried butter on a stick.
But whatever you do, don't wimp out.
Now you're talking.
Make them buckle up.
He can't hurt.
Remember, safety first. Cheese curls second.
Are you orange?
need to know. We're talking about the Virginia elections 2017. Joining me is Ben Tribbett, a political analyst here in Virginia who's been studying elections for 20 years. And what I want to know, Ben, is talk about the 3 elections that are yet undecided.
Well, there's 3 races that are going to probably go to recount. I'm not sure if I would call them undecided. I think the AP is calling them undecided because they don't call races that can go to recount. The first is the widest margin here in Fairfax County, Tim Hugo against Dante Tanner. Dante actually had a lead on election night. It was pretty clear when I was going through the results that there could be some issues, though, on election night because the numbers weren't quite lining up in terms of what happened. And when they did the canvass, there were 100 votes that were missing for Tim Hugo in one precinct and I think 86 in another, which put him back in the lead. He's now in the lead over 100 votes. You're not going to make up 100 votes in a recount. Right. So Tim Hugo is going to get reelected there. The question is whether Dante wants to go through a recount or not. The state will pay for it. It's less than 0.5%. By the way, just throw out there, I thought he ran a really good campaign, and I think Dante is going to be a big star in the party going forward. But I think this recount's probably a waste of time. The second race is in the Fredericksburg area, and that one is a margin of 84, which also could not be made up in a recount. But there's a lot of other things happening there, which we can get back to. And then the third race is a 10-vote margin that's down in Newport News. That is likely to overturn in a recount. Democrats tend to pick up votes in recounts. Our voters are a little bit more creative in how they mark their ballots. And so in a recount, when you hand examine the ballots, Democrats tend to pick up, 25 to 35 votes in a House district race. So it would actually be, I've been telling people, it's better than 50-50 that the House will be 50-50, because if they pick up that seat in Hampton Roads, it will be 50-50. Which brings us back to Fredericksburg. So Fredericksburg has had a lot of things happening. First, there was a report of 55 military ballots that were received on Tuesday that were not counted because they didn't make it to the registrar's office until Wednesday, that the Democratic caucus had a conference call about. That was a complete lie. There were, in fact, 55 ballots that arrived on Wednesday. They were not military ballots. And every locality in the state actually had ballots come in on Wednesday and Thursday. This is what happens when you have people mail in their ballots. They think they have to postmark it by Tuesday. No, it has to be received by Tuesday. So there's no evidence that these ballots in Stafford County were any different than the over 500 ballots that came in Wednesday and Thursday in Fairfax County that did not get counted. So the Democrats filed an injunction with a judge on that was thrown out of court, not surprisingly. Then the second issue that came from that was this issue in Fredericksburg. So initially the Democrats claimed there could be 660 or so people that voted in the incorrect precinct in a race that was decided by less than 100 votes. That turned out to also be completely false. It looks like there's 1 or 2 streets that were put into the wrong precinct. What they came out with yesterday, I think the State Board of Elections said 82 or 83.
That's what I heard.
Voters, not they
not households, because I heard that it's like Charles and Charlotte streets were the 2 streets, and somebody interviewed said they thought that was like 45 to 55 houses, but there's more than 1 voter. And remember that we're talking about when they said 83 registered voters. In this election, about half the people voted in Fredericksburg. So probably only 40 or so took ballots on election day. And we're talking about a race that's being decided by 82. But the numbers are getting thrown out, and I think in some cases falsely, at larger numbers because the House Democrats are looking to challenge this election. They're not thinking they can win it in a recount. They want to challenge the election and say that whatever numbers they can come up with are greater than the difference, hence we should throw this election out. Because if you were able to throw that election out, the Democrats would control a 50 to 49 majority in the meantime. Obviously, Republicans, having narrowly won the election, are not interested in throwing the election out. So that is what we are headed to in Fredericksburg, is a battle in the courts and on the floor about whether or not that election will stand. And there's a lot to play out there, but at the end of the day, it's likely to be adjudicated by the new House of Delegates. Right, so if it ends up being 50-50 in the House of Delegates, one of your tweets pointed out very provocatively that the Speaker of the House doesn't actually have to be a member of the House of Delegates, and you kind of threw out the name of former Governor Doug Wilder as a possible Speaker of the House. Now, was that serious on your part, or were you just kind of tantalizing us with all of the possibilities?
I had actually heard that from a Republican consultant, that he threw out that name of, what are the names out there that could draw bipartisan support. That doesn't mean it will be him. I'm not sure if he would accept, but, that's what in a 50-50 House they're going to have to come up with a compromise, or all the delegates will just sit on the floor, and whichever side takes a bathroom break first, the other side will get the speaker.
That is crazy. Is this ever happened before? Has there ever been a 50-50, and how was that resolved?
It was 50-50 in 1997. It was actually, the election landed 51-49 Democratic, and Jim Gilmore appointed 3 delegates, 1 Democrat, 2 Republicans to his administration, won all 3 special elections, so made it 50-50. And the Democrats refused to seat the 3 special election winners until after they elected a speaker. So that's how it was resolved.
Wow. Could something similar happen if they can?
Well, we haven't had any special elections, but I think what the Democrats are hoping for is that they could challenge in Fredericksburg to have a temporary 50-49 majority. I think what will happen then is the Republicans will challenge Newport News if the recount changes the results there, to make it 49-49.
So this is all very strategic, because session starts January 10th. That is just like in the blink of an eye. All of this takes so long.
And when a challenge is filed, it gets referred to the Privileges and Elections Committee. Up until the House is sworn in, it's the old Privileges and Elections Committee that still exists. So it would be the old House's Privileges and Elections Committee, 15-8 Republican, that would adjudicate it in committee to send a recommendation to the House, but the new House of Delegates would be the one to vote on it on the floor.
Wow, this is why people should pay attention in civics class. For all the 8th graders out there, pay attention. There is a lot to how all of this works. So let's talk a little bit about Fredericksburg and split precincts, because I did not know until I had talked to Brian Cannon on a previous show that there are 224 split precincts in Virginia.
Thank you, George Barker.
Some of them split 3 ways. Like in Newport News, which is where Shelley Simons is, there are 2 precincts in Newport News that are split 3 different ways. So how is this possible, and why do we have so many?
So the way that redistricting works is that it's not done by precinct. It's done by census block. And so the actual document that is sent out will describe precincts, and people think that's the redistricting bill. It's not. That's just a description Legislative Services puts together to make it simple to read. It's actually done by census block. And census blocks don't line up to precincts. So one of the things that you see every redistricting is a big fight over what's called the range of difference. You can't have districts that are perfectly evenly populated. Democrats have tended to say we could have up to a 5% difference. Republicans want no more than a 1% difference. The smaller the difference, the more split precincts you will have, because you're unable to pull an entire precinct into an area. There's a reason why the Democrats want 5% and the Republicans want 1%. It has a lot to do with party control and which one advantages which side, of course. But the net of it is that the Republicans won out, and there was a very tiny difference that was allowed for the House of Delegates and State Senate in the last redistricting. And so that requires a lot of split precincts. Now, the State Senate lines in particular were drawn where they didn't have to split as many as they did, and they just did. They didn't care. And what that leads to on Election Day is, let's say you're a voter in a split precinct. You would go in, and when you check in, they'd figure out which precinct you're in. They'd probably hand you a card, maybe a green card or yellow card for the right district, and you walk back to get your ballot from a green folder or a yellow folder. They could hand you the wrong card. The wrong ballot could be in the wrong folder. Lots of things can happen in a split precinct that it's not always perfect. The election officials do the best they can, but split precincts are very complicated to run, and errors happen all the time. In this case, what happened was not only were there some voters handed the wrong ballots on Election Day, but then there were 2 precincts that were wrongly marked in 2 streets that were wrongly marked in the poll book of what precincts. So they were actually told to give them the wrong ballots. And those two streets made up about 83 voters, maybe 40 or so that participated in this election. So, how do you make that up to a voter after the fact? That's something that's up to the courts, and probably the courts will probably punt it to the challenge process in the House of Delegates. It's probably up to the House of Delegates what to do in this situation.
Well, that's one to watch for sure. But let's talk a little bit, because, gerrymandered districts are something we talk about a lot. But you pointed out to me there's a certain nuance here, and it's very different between how districts are drawn for incumbency versus how they might be drawn for some other consideration.
Right. Gerrymandering is the act of drawing a district for party advantage. Virginia's districts are not gerrymandered. Virginia's districts are drawn for party advantage. And so, using as an example this last election, if you wanted to draw for party advantage and ignore where the current delegates lived, how many of them would be in their correct districts, how many of them would have to face primary challenges from within their own party, we throw out all the current delegates. Say we don't care if any of them come back. You could draw 59 districts that voted for Ed Gillespie by 10% or more, very easily. And you do that by blowing up population centers like Roanoke into multiple districts, drag it out into different areas. San Rasul would be gone. The Blacksburg seat, we just picked up Chris Hurst. You could blow it up into multiple areas. Chris Hurst is gone. The Henrico area, if you drew one more Democratic seat, we picked up 3 in the Richmond area.
Right.
The other 2 would flip back to being Republican. Draw one more Democratic seat in Virginia Beach, you could flip over 2 other seats back to Republicans. And then you draw one more Democratic seat in the Woodbridge area, around where Jennifer Carroll Floyd just picked up a seat, and the other 3 in Prince William that just picked up could all be gone. So gerrymandering would be drawing districts to that type of party advantage. Instead, it was drawn to where the incumbents live and what basis of support they had. And then once that was done, how else can we draw it to be a little bit more advantageous to them? That's not gerrymandering by its definition. And so when you look at these districts and you know they're drawn for party advantage, that's why the Republicans lost control, was because they didn't gerrymander the state. They drew it for incumbent advantage, and incumbent advantage seats can't survive waves.
So what's the answer? So what's the answer as we tackle gerrymandering, what we're calling gerrymandering? What's the answer?
Well, I mean, look, people say we have to stop gerrymandering because it doesn't allow people to have a say. It looks like they had quite a say on Tuesday. I've always been in favor of nonpartisan commission doing it. I think it is a complicating factor to say who will be on that nonpartisan commission, who has the knowledge of the state to be able to correctly draw these districts. The people that have that knowledge tend to be political people that have interests. Mm-hmm. And so, Catherine, I could be on a redistricting commission and know the state very well. I bet I probably could get 95 delegates to say he would be a very bad choice for a redistricting commission.
Probably.
And maybe 5 might agree that I was a good choice. And so, the people that tend to have the most knowledge are not the people you want to have on a redistricting commission. And that's complicating. I, as a political consultant, love redistricting commissions because commissions tend to throw incumbents in the same districts to create all sorts of internal party fights.
Right.
Political consultants make a lot of money when that happens. So we don't make as much money when there's incumbent protection and everyone just gets reelected with 70% of the vote. That having been said, Virginia doesn't really have a gerrymandering problem. If you take Fairfax County, the House delegates and the state Senate districts that are in Fairfax County, and you put it to a gerrymandering score, the most gerrymandered districts are actually the Board of Supervisors.
That is fascinating. And I just want to say thank you so much, Ben, for being here. I think we're going to have another show out of this because there is so much more that you need to know.